moving this motion. It's very timely, and thank you for the kind words in asking me to second. I rise to second and support this bill. This bill is very important. First, for context, the Attorney General and Kenyan officials are called every couple of years to report on the status and the conditions of our human rights according to the treaties and other obligations we have signed on to. In fact, the President every year in his State of the Nation address brings one special report as required by the Constitution on the status of our international obligation, another one on national security, another one on national values. So it is in that context that this bill is important, because in the last universal peer review reports that Kenya has been subjected to, in the last reports to the African Commission on People and Human Rights in Banjul, Kenya has been told several times to come up with such laws as the National Coroner Service Act, as well as the Prevention of Torture Act, which is also on the order paper, I'm delighted to note, brought by the Honour Leader of Majority. These are rule of justice and access to justice questions. When you look at the Sustainable Development Goals, goals number 16, relates to access to justice and rule of law. And when you think about the functions of the coroner as laid out by the Majority Leader Honorable Duale, this will be enhancing the rule of law in Kenya, the access to justice, the systems in which, in cases of unnatural death, you can actually have a proper investigation and credible prima facie evidence from a competent authority. The Constitution of Kenya 2010, in our Bill of Rights, speaks to issues such as equal protection under the law, fair administrative action, right to life and dignity. These are all important issues, again, that if you see amongst the poorest people in Kenya and our current regime, if you need a post-mortem or a professional death investigation, if you're poor, you won't get it. But now that we are passing this law, everyone will have access to it. And that is good. And that promotes, again, rule of law and human rights and justice for all Kenyans, regardless of whether they are poor enough, too poor to afford a death investigation and a professional post-mortem. The National Coroner Service will allow us to have a Coroners General with his staff and team in different regions of the country, if possible in all of the counties, but if not possible at the beginning, definitely in several regions of the country. It will allow that office operating with a council of many PSs, but also representatives of the medical practitioners and dentists union, the Law Society of Kenya, to really come together and oversee that service. I think it must be an independent and reliable coroner service that is well funded to do its work on time and credibly. As Honorable Duale has mentioned, the issue of timelines in death investigations. We want to make sure that even if they are retaining samples and tissues from bodies, that bodies are released on time for the families for burial, and just only the necessary samples for their evidence gathering and concluding reports are held. This National Coroner Service will help us to establish a professional class of forensic pathologists, crime scene investigators, and other people who will help to improve this practice in Kenya. For now, most of the investigations are inconclusive, and the evidence brought for prosecution, even where the suspected foul play, often does not rise to the level that is credible enough to assure successful prosecution, and perpetrators are held to account. The cost of postmortem in reportable and investigatable death is also covered by the state, and I think this bill goes ahead very well with the National Legal Aid Act, which we passed last year, to make sure that in cases of reportable deaths, the case will cover, and the state will cover the cost. And I will go into the details of some of those reportable and investigatable deaths are. It also is a good law because it gives leeway for the coroner to issue waivers and burial certificates. I come from Kibra constituency that has got Muslim cultures, and in consulting about this bill and doing research, we've talked to Muslim communities from Northeastern, from the coast, and they're very concerned about how postmortems are conducted, mandatory postmortems, in what type of cases, and in what cases will they be allowed to waive postmortems and just go ahead and bury according to the dictates of their cultures and practices. The way Muslims practice in Kenya is very different. In countries like Sudan, Khartoum, They actually conduct postmortems, although they are a majority Muslim country, just like anywhere else. In Senegal, the same. In Kenya, we have Muslims. They're not the majority, but Kenyan Muslims are very strict and inclined to quick burial without postmortems, especially where it involves female relatives who are deceased. So I think we've put in provisions there to allow family members, in cases where postmortems will be conducted, a family member or a representative of a family should be able to participate, just so that the family feels comfortable about that procedure. As we make this National Coroner Service that needs to be competent, credible, independent, reliable, well-funded, I think we will need to advance some elements of the bill to bring in the role of Parliament in receiving reports on an annual basis from the National Coroner Service. I think in the appointment of the Coroner General, we must make sure that the vetting process and the approval is done by Parliament. The initial competitive search should be done by the Council, as promoted here in this amendment, but in this proposed law. But also, the Coroner General should be an appointee of the President. So they're nominated by the Council of the National Coroner Service, and the names taken to the President, upon choosing who his appointee should be, to nominate that person to be brought to Parliament for vetting, because again, this is supposed to be a very independent type of office, like the Office of the Director of Public Prosecutions, the Ethics and Anti-Corruption Commission, people who really have a very important place to play in our rule of law and access to justice system. So we want a strong and independent person, but also who is answerable to the people, including the process for their removal should be able to be initiated through a petition to Parliament, not only by dismissal by the Council or by the President as the appointing authority, but also through petition from Parliament if their conduct is wanting and unprofessional or below standards. The Council of the National Coroner Service is well structured. It's government heavy with the relevant PSS for security, justice, health, treasury, and representative of the Medical Practitioners and Dentists Union. But I also think what is missing in there is a representative of civil society, and in this case, as I say, to propose and put in the Law Society of Kenya as a key practitioners and consumers and providers of justice in this country. So we would want to make sure they're also involved in there, because this is not just a health issue, it is a major issue of access to justice and rule of law, and we need them there in the oversight and the crafting of that bill. The authority. The National Coroner Office, it's interesting. It's like the Auditor's General Office when it comes to human rights, where deaths have been involved, where the right to life has been taken in a questionable manner. So I really think their annual reporting requirements should be clear. They should link somehow with the Office of the Director of Public Prosecutions in a major way. But I know when this House passes the bill, we will have met a requirement that we've constantly been told we need to do and catch up on in promoting the rule of law and widening that space in Kenya, even at our last universal peer review in Geneva. I wanted to mention specific bits of the Act, apart from the generalities. It is a good law, actually. I've been studying this law for the last 3 years, and I brought it to the Justice Committee, and I'm happy that Honorable Duale, through the AG, also came up with the same law, which is 95% the same. So I think great minds think alike, and as I'm seconding, I would say we must make sure it's independent enough. When you think about the Section 3 of the bill, it talks about providing complementary role of forensic medical science services to the police in handling investigation. I think we have to look at that language to make sure the office is independent while complementary to the police, and that police are not running parallel death investigations and interfering with the mandate and sphere of the National Coroner Service. The role of the government chemist must be looked at, because the National Coroner Service will be people who are experts in forensic pathology. But if you really want to look at justice in death cases, you're thinking of it as a three-legged stool, which one part of it relies on the police who do the criminalistics. You rely on some experts who might do ballistics, where cases of bullets and other things are involved, but you're relying also on the science and the evidence.
Honorable member for Kibra, you'll have an extra 2 minutes so that you can do
Thank you. I'm sorry, Mr. Speaker. I didn't see the light come on to warn me that my time had run out. So I'll try to run through my 2 minutes carefully and do the highlights. But we need to do make sure that the government chemist helps and assists once the evidence has been taken by the forensic pathologist in the coroner's office. It's done. The two issues of helping this office to be really robust and independent would be question of its budgeting lines and making sure, is it something that will be budgeted for and spoken for through the consolidated fund, or in some other ways that it is not hampered in doing its duty because of budgeting constraints. But number two is the balance between the role of the Public Service Commission in appointing the employees of the coroner's service. If the Coroner General cannot appoint his employee, or the council of the coroner's service cannot employ their own people who are the professionals, then there is a risk there. And that is an issue that I think is subject to debate and we need to look at carefully. Mr. Speaker, the other members, I'm sure, will touch on these bills, but I think Kenyans are interested, and I would love to put it on notice. What type of deaths are the suspicious deaths that will have to be reported and have to be investigated? So any death as a matter of violence, medical negligence, misconduct or malpractice, cases of suicide, homicide and accident, deaths during pregnancy or circumstances that might be attributable to. This is section 24 of the bill. It talks about that death from disease or sickness which were not treated by legally qualified practitioners, occupation and workplace related deaths. We need to add that in there because a lot of people might die from being exposed to chemicals in an industry, in a flower farm, for example. Those type of things need to be covered. And once these reportable deaths are done, there is a nature of the reporting that even deaths in custody, when police take somebody and the next day the person is dead, or they are released and they die within a few hours because they might have been tortured or mistreated under police custody, under military custody, they were taken by KWS. We've seen a lot of these cases in this country. So I think those are cases that must be investigated. Deaths that occur after surgical procedures within a short time, again, those are things that must be looked at. So there's a whole range of deaths that are in section 28 that must be investigated. And I love that the law is very clear as we are proposing it on what the report should constitute, on the cause of death, the place of death, possible perpetrator, and that report will be prima facie evidence for prosecution or for an inquest, and that can be handed over to the Director of Public Prosecution and the police to do their work in the criminalistics and others to help promote the rule of justice in Kenya. So with those few remarks, I must say on my own behalf and on behalf of the Parliamentary Human Rights Caucus, it's something we've been paying attention for the last 3 years, and I'm happy it has come at the tail end of Parliament, and I hope that members will support us to pass it through third reading quickly, along with the leadership of the House, Honorable Duale, and it will be a bill that Kenyans can benefit from once it's signed by the President as a law. I beg to second, and thank you, Mr. Speaker.